As I was putting his socks back on, he just kind of said to me, "Oh, I see you every morning. You're always smiling. You look really happy. The other doctors don't really look as happy, so keep smiling." You can't measure that. You can't give a grade on that. But I do think in that moment I was a successful medical student because it impacted the patient in this way. Hi, my name's Jordan, and welcome to Stories and Scrubs, a space that validates medical student experience, facilitates thoughtful reflection, and encourages the development of emotional intelligence. Each episode, I join a medical student or doctor to reflect on an important moment in their medical journey. In this episode, I speak to Fortunate, a medical student, about success within medicine. Hi, thanks for coming on Stories and Scrubs. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Fortunate, and I'm in my fourth year of medical school at Imperial.
Okay, nice to meet you. And what story is it that you'd like to share?
Okay, so I think the story that I would like to share was, I think it was a journey from first year of medical school up until now. So in my first year, you know, I was very keen on being the top of the year. I've just finished A levels and I was just used to just being that person that was always the top of the class, if that makes sense. And I wanted to sort of recreate that in medical school. Like I wanted to be top. Like although I knew that it was okay to just pass and move on, I wanted those distinction star, distinction, merit. I was really aiming for that. But I think in first year, I got married and I was like a bit sad. I wasn't very happy because I was like, oh my God, like it has to be a distinction or a distinction star. Um, and then in second year, I kept on that same attitude, and then I got nothing. I passed, but without any like award. And I remember just feeling super sad. And in that moment, the first thing that came to my mind is, "You've passed. Why are you sad?" Like it was, yeah, like I was just surprised. Like I couldn't be happy. I couldn't celebrate the fact that I've just made it past 2 years of medical school without having to like resit. Like that should be a joy. But I couldn't be happy because I was just like, oh my God, I didn't get a distinction. I didn't get a distinction star. I didn't get what I wanted. But it just basically like it just made medical school unbearable, like essentially, because I was aiming for something I couldn't get. So when I got into my third year, I was like, okay, right, we've got to do something different. I can't keep living this life where I'm so like, it has to be a distinction style, nothing. So I was just like, okay, we're doing this differently. I'm gonna go into third year and I'm just gonna just focus on learning to become a good doctor. Because at the end of the day, my patients aren't gonna know what grades I got in medical school. All they care about is, can you be my doctor? Can you look after me? So I'm going to focus on just being a good doctor. So I went in with that. I would take my time. I would just learn the conditions as I did my placement. And yeah, overall, it just felt so much better. It felt like a heavy weight was just lifted off my shoulder, and I could just be like relaxed and not stressed and actually just learn what it takes to be a doctor. I think from then on, I've just had a different perspective. Like whether I get a distinction star or I don't, it doesn't matter. Like what really matters to me right now is just becoming a good doctor because like I've already made it this far. I don't really need to prove anything else to myself or to anyone else. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you've really hit on something significant there. And I think there is a kind of shift from when you're in school. It does tend to be the people who get into medicine, perform very well academically. We're constantly getting praise from teachers, being told you have lots of potential, it's all very exciting. And then you come into med school and you find that everybody else has also had a similar experience. So then amongst the people within med school, you become average. Like I remember for myself,
as well, it is quite a difficult transition to kind of move from having that external validation and being motivated by getting high marks in exams to then finding that actually you're only doing average and being kind of at peace with that. I was wondering whether because of the shift from being top of the class to being average, did that kind of affect your confidence at all? And did it ever kind of play into any imposter syndrome at medical school?
Yeah, I would say looking back, yes. Because yeah, it's just like what you were saying. Back in secondary school, it was like your teachers knew you. They knew that you were this person that had so much potential. They knew you wanted to study medicine. They knew you were the one, like you were the top of the class. And it's like you go into school, like, like, yes, like people know me. And then you get into uni and yeah, like you're suddenly just average. Like you start to realize that there's so many other people that are way more intelligent, way more smarter. They've done so much more than you've done, and you're just there, just being average. And it's it knocks you. It knocked me a little bit. I went by being able to like I had to accept that, which is not like if you're a medical student, it's not something you're used to. Like accepting that you are just average, so that definitely did affect me, and I would always like compare myself to people that are like at the top, like oh, like if they can do it, why can't I? um, yeah, so I do agree, like definitely changes how you feel like in your inner self because like you don't realize how much validation you take from other people until you come to medical school and you no longer have this validation anymore.
I think just in terms of what you were saying, in med school, there are kind of lots of exams and we're kind of constantly, especially within Imperial, it can feel like there's a kind of quite a competitive nature within medicine and everyone's kind of competing against each other to get some more of that external validation that they were kind of used to at school. I've got, it's one question, but I've got kind of two different ways for you to think about it. So just thinking in terms of all the examinations and everything that we have at med school, first of all, do you think that academic success is an appropriate predictor of being a good doctor? And secondly, do you think that academic pressure helped you to become a better doctor?
So for the first question, do I think that academic success is a good prediction of being a good doctor? I'd say yes and no. So that I think it's a part of it, but it's not like the whole thing, if that makes sense. I think first of all is how you define academic success. So with academic success, my definition right now would be being able to sort of pass medical school, like just pass. I think that is a big achievement because like it's actually not that easy to pass. So being able to pass is my definition of academic success. So I think that's very important to do well because it then shows that you're learning something and ultimately you want to, as a doctor, you want to understand the science behind what you're doing, why it's important what you're doing. I think you sort of learn all of that in medical school. However, when it comes to the practical side of things, I don't think academic success is going to do that for you. Like the fact that you've passed medical school does not necessarily mean that you can communicate well with your patient, which is something that the patient will care about more than whether you have passed a module or you haven't. Like they care about, can you talk to me like a human being? Can you empathize with me? Are you able to do practical things as well? Because like it's so interesting because you can go through medical school and there's still skills that practical skills that you don't know how to do on an actual patient. So I feel like those things you can't measure with just academic success. Like it goes beyond that. I think it's more so being able to show up to things, being able to be hands on, ready to learn, being around the patient, getting used to what the hospital or like GP environment is like, seeing how like what role you play in there. You even get that if you're just locked in your room studying 24/7. You actually don't care. You just want to pass and get distinction. Um, I don't think you make a good doctor because yes, you can have all the grades and it looks nice on your CV, but for the patient, it actually means absolutely nothing. And I think that's what matters the most in medicine. It's the patient that matters. So.
Yeah, and just thinking in terms of how the academic pressure impacted you. Obviously, there's a balance, but do you think that academic pressure was good and it pushed you to kind of do more and push yourself further than you would have otherwise? Or do you think it impacted you negatively and actually, if you didn't have as much pressure, then you could have worked on some of those other skills that you were talking about?
I would first 2 years of medical school definitely impacted me negatively. Um, but again, that's because I've put so much pressure on myself. I don't think medical school itself was putting the pressure on me. Like they just wanted me to pass. But I personally was like, yeah, this is the pressure I'm setting on myself. It has to be a distinction or a distinction star or nothing. So I think that definitely negatively impacted me because I was studying to pass, not studying to understand. And I think that when you're studying to pass, am I really learning? That's the question. You do your exam, but like what happens after the exam? Like what do you actually learn? What actually stays in your brain? Like is it like you pass the exam and then after that you're just like you don't remember anything? Because all you care about is just exam, exam, exam. So yeah, I would definitely say that for me, it negatively impacted me. I think the pressure that would have been nice to put on myself would have been just the pressure to pass and the pressure to understand what I'm actually learning and be able to like if someone were to sit me down and say, "What do you understand about this? Explain it to me in a way that I can also understand it." I want to be able to give it to them, and it makes sense in my head and it makes sense to them. So I think that would have been the best type of pressure to put on myself.
Yeah, I think I was actually going to go back to something that you said in your reflection in the beginning about how in third year you struck more of a balance and you let go of some of that pressure and actually you found medicine more enjoyable and more manageable. I think it's important to remember that there's no end point for medicine in terms of it's not let's do this exam and then that's it, we can kind of forget all about medicine and there's nothing beyond that. This is something that we're going to be doing for the next 30, 40 years potentially, and I think it is important to kind of have built in that sustainability where you can actually practice medicine for a long time. Just thinking around kind of success and academic success, and we were talking about how in school there's a definition of success which is you get lots of praise and you do really well in exams, and then you come to medical school and actually there are kind of other things that might make you successful. Just thinking about a a really successful medical student or a really successful doctor, what does that actually mean to you beyond doing well in exams?
Looking back to my work experience before medical school, what I would say would make a good doctor, based on what I would see the patient do, is when a patient, after their experience, they actually like are so grateful and so thankful. Like I know, yeah, like it's not always going to be the case even though you try your best as a doctor. There is like a patient will still be very angry. They just couldn't get what they wanted. But I feel like on most days, most patients are really always super grateful when a doctor makes such an impact in their lives. Um, so yeah, I'd say what really makes a great doctor is a doctor that actually like impacts their patient's life and actually makes a difference. Whether it's in just being able to like listen to them and how that would look like in medical school would be taking time to actually take a history from the patient and like just talk to them and it just comes from you. Like it doesn't even have to be a structured history because like at this point it's just you, no one's actually watching what you're doing. So you just go in and you actually just talk to them. I think it would definitely make their day to know that, oh, someone is like interested in me and like they want to know what brought me in. They want to know why I'm here. So yeah, that for sure. And also, another thing I realized about great doctors are doctors that know how to work well in the multidisciplinary team. Like they have a good like relationship with the nurses. They have a good relationship with like other healthcare professionals, and like you just know a great doctor when a doctor comes on the ward and the nurses are like super happy to see them, like because they just know that this doctor is someone that we can approach. They're very approachable. We can talk to them about like a patient condition and they would actually listen. And whenever I saw that, I was like, yes, this is the type of doctor that I would want to be in the future. Like the doctor that nurses aren't like scared of, like, oh my God, like this doctor that doesn't actually listen and doesn't care. And a doctor where patients will actually see me and they'll be like, oh, I'm so grateful you're the person that's talking to me today. So I think those are the things that I would want to focus a lot more on doing at medical school. So that by the time I actually start practicing as a doctor, like it wouldn't be such a struggle to do things like that.
Yeah, I think you've really touched on the fact that some of the things that make a really good doctor and a really good medical student are things that can't really be measured, and there's no kind of outcome measure for how good you make a patient feel or how safe a patient feels around you. I had a kind of similar experience on placement a few months ago that I kind of wanted to just quickly talk about. I was on the ward round and I was with two doctors, and I was kind of going round with them, feeling kind of useless, not really doing very much, just kind of following them around. One of the doctors was writing up the notes, the other one was examining the patient. There wasn't really much for me to do. I felt like a bit of a spare part. And we saw one of the patients and then kind of came out of the bay. And then one of the doctors said, "Oh, can you go and back?" And I think one of the doctors had examined one of the patients and was looking at his feet, and they'd kind of forgotten to put the socks back on. So they'd kind of said to me, "Oh, do you mind just like going back and putting the socks back on?" So I went over, and the patient was he had I think he had dementia. He was from a home, and he'd had kind of a few aggressive moments on the ward. But on the morning ward round, he seemed to be in quite a good mood. And as I was putting his socks back on, he just kind of said to me, "Oh, I see you every morning. You're always smiling. You look really happy. The other doctors don't really look as happy. So keep smiling." And that stuck with me. And I think, like as you were saying, you can't measure that. You can't give a grade on that. But I do think in that moment I was a successful medical student because it impacted the patient in this way. And I think to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier, obviously it's difficult to be a good doctor without having the knowledge and the skills and all of those things. But I think that success within medicine is kind of something that you can't define and you can't measure. And there's no distinctions or merits for that kind of success, unfortunately. I just wanted to talk a little bit about success. Obviously, when you're at school, it's kind of very easy to be motivated by getting really good grades and getting praised by teachers. I was just curious what kind of things motivate you now within medicine.
I'm gonna be completely honest. It's still a struggle, like completely letting go of like wanting to have this like top level academic success. Like as much as I'm like, yes, I'm on this journey where I no longer care. Like there's still a tiny part of me that is still like maybe I could still get it. Like Um, so I would say, okay, maybe like being completely honest, maybe 10% at the back of my mind, that still drives me. But it drives me in a way where I don't really care what the outcome is at the end of the day. Like, yes, I can study with the aim of if I do this much every day, that is good quality study. It might lead to a distinction star, it might not lead to it. But I'm still studying with the aim of I want to study as well as I can, like humanly possible, without obviously stressing myself or like burning out. So I would say, yeah, that is still like a surface level motivation for me through medical school because it's very hard to completely get rid of it. But beyond that, motivation through medical school, I would say this is very funny, but the fact that my parents already called me a doctor, so I kind of like have to pass. um, no, but no. Um, Essentially, my parents are like motivation for me because like they sort of encourage me. They are like, "Yeah, you're a doctor," in like a very encouraging, not pressuring way. Just like saying, "I know you can do it. I know you've got it in you. Like you've made it this far. You're definitely going to finish it." So yeah, that's definitely motivation for me. It's also I know that I'm doing this for the patient that I'm going to look after in the future. I know they're going to have questions, and even though I can't answer every question they have, it will help that I study well because then I can probably answer some of the questions because I've actually studied it and I actually understand things and I can explain it to them. So I would say that is definitely motivation.
I think that outside perspective from parents and family and friends, especially when you're within medicine and you're thinking, oh, I got 65% in this, somebody else got 70%. It can be really powerful, I think, when you talk to people outside of medicine and all they say is, you're a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. I think having people to kind of remind you of that can be really helpful. I think it was maybe in my first or second year, we had a talk and we got told that even the person who comes bottom of the year, as long as they pass, they still get called doctor at the end of the medical degree. I think the other thing you're saying as well about future patients is really interesting because I also feel the same where you realise that one day you might be doing a night shift and you might be the only doctor on the ward and you might have to treat somebody with this condition and the responsibility is going to be on you, and that is like genuinely that is a really scary thought. And I think one of the things that kind of reassures me is the fact that I know that I've kind of put in effort at med school and I have spent all of those hours in the library and studying and doing flashcards. I mean, I think we all kind of still have some residual competitiveness and kind of wanting to do well in exams, but it's good that you can see there's kind of a reason to want to learn these things in detail and want to be able to explain it to patients and treat patients in a safe way. So yeah, just kind of thinking about the kind of things we've spoken about, and you were kind of talking about how in third year you treat things differently to how you did in first year. Is there anything that you wish you'd known earlier on in terms of motivating yourself in med school and being more at peace with the idea of not getting the top mark and not getting awards and things like that?
The one thing that's coming to mind is what someone told me before medical school that I didn't listen to. um, so just before I got into medical school, I remember meeting someone that was already a medical student. And then once I told her, yeah, I want to study medicine, she looked at me and then she said, in medical school, you're always going to feel like you have a lot to catch up on. And back then I was like, you're kidding. Like, I'm literally doing A levels. What could be harder than that? Like, I'm killing it right now. Like, I'm gonna be fine. Obviously, I didn't say this to her, but I remember just thinking I can definitely do better than that. Like, just thinking that's a you problem. That is not a me problem. Um, so I wish I had listened to her. I wish I had taken what she said and got into first year and not have put so much pressure on myself to the point where I burnt out. Because if I had listened, then you wouldn't have stressed me when I was struggling, when I was stressing out about getting the distinction star. I would have remembered what she said and been like, oh yeah, she did tell me this. It's very stressful. There's a lot to learn in medicine. You can't completely learn everything, so relax, you'll be fine. It doesn't mean you're dumb. It's just the nature of medicine. So yeah, that is something looking back I wish I had taken into consideration before I actually started medical school.
Yeah, I think the amount of content that you're exposed to, especially in first year, can be a bit of a wake up call. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
when you're at school and you're doing A levels, it's kind of I don't know whether it was the same for you, but we literally had textbooks that everything we needed to know was within it, and we could just learn a chapter, and that meant we'd learned like a section of the content, and we knew that that was done. And if it came up in the exam, it would only be the things that were covered there. Whereas, yeah, medicine is you're kind of taught things in such a way that there's always another layer of knowledge that can go on top of the thing you just learned. I remember pretty much every lecture we had, there'd be at least one person who would say, "How much of this do we need to know? Like, what's the kind of looking for a ceiling on how much, like, what is the limit of the knowledge that we need to have to be able to know everything that comes up in the exam?" And I think, yeah, I think for me, my piece of advice that I wish I'd known earlier was just to kind of accept that or acknowledge that in first year you're exposed to all of the medicine that pretty much all of the medicine that exists, and you can't learn it all in the year, but you do eventually over the years build up a knowledge, and then you can add another layer and then another layer, and then when you get to like having the hindsight of being at the end of medical school, you do look back and realize that there are things that just stick in your head now that you didn't know before. Learning medicine is a process, and it's okay to not know everything in the beginning. If you're doing average in med school, then that means you're learning enough to be a safe doctor, and you are doing enough, and you're already achieving so much by even being average. So it's important to try and kind of be at peace with that.
I think it's just when you were talking, I just realized that actually medicine is like a lifelong learning. Like that's not just something we say on a personal statement. Like that is actually real. Like you're learning every day. Um, and another thing that's also interesting is the fact that um, what it actually means, the practical being a doctor is so different from like what we do in medical school as well. So like just relax. Like you're gonna like there's so many times and opportunities to learn because like it's just a continuous learning. Things will change, things will be different. And like just take it easy or else like you're just gonna be burnt out every single time. Because the learning never stops, essentially.
Yeah, I remember we got told, I can't remember what the exact percentage was, but we got told a statistic that by the time you finish medical school, something like 20% of the stuff you learned in first year, there'll actually be like evidence that it's not true anymore. So like, I think there's definitely a limit in terms of how quickly you can learn things. You can't absorb all of the knowledge that exists within medicine because it's constantly changing and evolving anyway. So yeah, as long as you kind of cover the basics and you are doing average, then you're doing more than enough. I think that was actually really interesting. And yeah, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Please subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, Stories and Scrubs, and follow us on Instagram at storiesandscrubs.podcast to hear about upcoming episodes, and check out the description of this episode to find out how to share your story. Thanks for listening.